Welcome back to the HDR Masterclass. In this segment, we're going to be talking about the benefits of HDR. The benefits are actually going to be pretty important to understand. It'll help give you an appreciation for the value of the effort that we put forth for HDR, and it'll also help you appreciate some of the personal as well as the skill advantages that you'll be able to eventually be able to have. Let's start by talking about why I personally am an HDR enthusiast. I find it a very good incentive for developing my own photography skills. I guess you could say it not only keeps me on my toes, but it also helps me be able to delve into issues that I might not have otherwise have looked at. Certainly the operation of the camera, certainly the imaging, processing of the images. It helps me understand my scene better. There's a number of benefits that I derive from HDR photography. So it also helps me stay alert to photography opportunities that I might otherwise have missed. And I've been there before, and I'm sure everybody has, where you're in a particular scenario and you say, that's just not going to come out good. There's too much light that's pouring in from a window, and I know that the camera's not going to meter properly, and I'll just pass that up. Well, with HDR photography, you don't have to pass up those types of situations. And so I have found that HDR photography has really opened up opportunities for me that I might otherwise have either missed or simply walked away from. It keeps me personally involved with my images. I mean, it's one thing to get behind a camera and you take some wonderful images and then it's sort of like kind of over. But when I shoot specifically for HDR processing, I know that I'm going to be able to come back to the house and sit to my work in the field that day and be able to process my images so that the final result is something that I'm happy with. Very often it gives me creative output, and I can do more with my images, is really what it comes down to. HDR has helped me to increase my technical quality of my work too. Not only am I able to utilize the camera better in a wider variety of scenarios, but I'm actually able to understand imaging better, understand software better, and to be able to derive the kind of images that I would like to see. It helps me create memorable and remarkable images that I otherwise would probably not have achieved. I mean, there was many years in my own photography journey where, well, I mean, you went in the field and you knew the limitations of the camera or the film, and you accepted that, and you worked around that, and when the film came back and it was processed, well, that's what you had. I was never one to spend long hours in a dark room developing film with chemicals, so I never really went there. For me, it was what the camera can give me, and the way the film was developed, well, that's pretty much it for me. But digital photography has really opened up opportunities, and then added to that, for me personally, HDR photography has just expanded my ability to work in digital photography and be able to have a final result of memorable, remarkable, and often stunning images that I personally am very proud of. The other thing about HDR photography is that it puts you in a position where you don't really have to accept what the camera gives you in the single frame scenario. So I know that when I'm in the field and I'm faced with a difficult scene, maybe one with a broad range of light levels all the way from dark shadows to bright sky, well, I know that my camera has limitations in a single frame, and HDR photography has enabled me to move beyond what my camera can give me in and of itself. I'm also very creative with HDR images. I personally utilize HDR so that I can derive what I would refer to as a realistic image, a beautiful landscape. I want to be able to have a final image that gives me something that's a realistic representation of that landscape. There are times where I'll go very creative, but I tend to be a user of HDR photography for purposes of realistic images, but that's just my personal preference. Probably the idea behind HDR photography, and if you think about it, this makes some sense. The idea is to not return home with disappointing images. As simple as that. You have a better chance of getting a wonderful image, especially in a difficult scene. You have a much better chance of being able to ultimately end up with a wonderful image had you simply relied upon the camera's single frame capability. You'll notice here that around the perimeter of this particular slide, there are a number of images. These are all mine, and I have many fond memories of these images. They're all processed in this particular slide. They're all processed as HDR. I've been able to have wonderful success with HDR. I have wonderful images that I'll treasure for the rest of my life. And what's nice about it is I didn't have to do a whole lot more work. Once I understood and embraced HDR photography, it really becomes second nature. So let's continue on talking about the benefits of HDR. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time with any one of these examples, but I do want to bring it to a point where there's an appreciation for the benefits that we can often derive from HDR. So this particular scene, there are my three captures. And you'll notice here by looking at the histogram, we're going to be talking about the histogram in some detail because it's a very important tool. But this particular histogram is showing shadow and highlight clipping. Very tough scene. But utilizing HDR, I'm able to derive a wonderful image that will give me the best possible range of exposures all the way through the image. So the idea is to eliminate the problem of clipping. Now, here's another scene. This is at Fairchild Garden in Florida. This is illustrating what's called the recovery or the retention of detail, which is another important benefit of HDR. In this particular scene here, what I'm trying to point out is that I have detail loss because that particular center portion of the single capture image was probably, it could have been a good mile away. But with HDR photography, if you take this little bracket, little segment right there, which is now blown up and shown for illustration purposes, you'll see here that the detail is recovered or retained in this particular scene because the camera itself would clip because of the extreme highlights and the extreme shadows in this particular outdoor scene. When the camera clips, there's no digital pixel information to work with anymore, and you lose data. You lose image information. So that's a key benefit of HDR, is detail recovery or retention. We're going to get into this a little bit more. This is actually important, but it is kind of a side benefit. The idea is to future-proof your images. There are my 3 captures there. These are all 8-bit file structures. In other words, 0 to 128 is the tonal numeric values within these images. They are then, during tone mapping, merged into a 32-bit image, and then those images can be stored as a 32-bit image. The point is that in 10 or 20 or 100 years, when that image is recalled on whatever they call computers then, the chances are better that that file could be read. So that's another benefit. HDR is a wonderful learning incentive. It gets you into your camera, it helps you understand the instrument better, and it provides the incentive to increase your skills, to look for new opportunities, photographic opportunities, and to pursue them, and to not be in the field and say, oh, it's not going to work for me, and just pass that up. You can go beyond the photo. That's a single capture, and it is what it is. But utilizing HDR, as you can see here, I got very creative. All right, that's not what the scene looked like, but it was a creative endeavor that I thoroughly enjoyed. So you can go beyond the photo. And you can even go further beyond the photo, because here, this scene was very, very tough. Very, very bright highlights, bright sky, very dark, deep shadows within the palm trees. And by the time I'm done utilizing HDR, I'm able to actually handle a very tough shot. You can have fun with HDR. I mean, here's what it comes down to. This is a single frame photo that I took in Arizona. Beautiful marina, absolutely gorgeous. And when I came home, I was able to process that to bring up the colors, retain the detail, even out the exposure. I mean, even to the point where these background rock formations, actually, if you look at this really closely, it has the detail. The detail has not been lost. So, wonderful benefits. Is HDR worth the work? Often, yes. And keep in mind that HDR, what you're trying to accomplish with HDR is a couple things. You're trying to get a even distribution of the exposure. You're trying to avoid clipping on the shadows or the black side, and clipping on the highlights or the white side. When you lose information, pixel information, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just gone. You cannot tone a missing pixel information. So in this particular case, the effort was worth it because it gave me an even distribution of exposure. In this lower case here, yes, HDR was worth it because it gave me detail retention. The detail down in all of these leaves was basically retained. So that's an important element. Is it worth the work? Very often, absolutely. This is another scenario of detail retention. And we have yet another example of detail retention. I think the point there is that HDR photography is not just about an even distribution of your exposure, but it's also about detail retention. And that is a key part. Now, let's take just a few minutes here and just talk about some of the history of HDR. Not so much HDR photography, but high dynamic range in and of itself. And I'm just going to go through this quickly because you can certainly pause the video and take a closer look at this yourself. But originally, the whole point and purpose of embracing high dynamic range was so that the multiple exposures could be combined together to be able to have a much more accurate representation of the scene. Way back in the 50s, high dynamic range was utilized because to film and photograph atomic explosions. Like you can only imagine the highlights involved there. Down through the 90s, there was a lot of effort that was put into high dynamic range all the way down through the 90s, and there was a lot of effort that was put into it. A lot of effort was put into high dynamic range for purposes of the visual effects industry, and really bringing us up to a point where, you know, really about in the mid 2000s, 2005 in that range, HDR software was being introduced and being utilized to help us in digital photography. It really, towards 2007 or thereabouts, we really saw HDR becoming more of a commonplace methodology, so that people could get some really good images in a wide variety of circumstances using their digital cameras. And now, currently we have many wonderful HDR software processing methods and solutions. Many books have been written on HDR. Our consumer cameras are usable within the HDR methodology. So we've really come a long way. We're going to find in the future, we're going to see HDR being moved inside the camera. We'll see more powerful, faster tone mapping tools that will come about. But I think we're also going to find that HDR photography will become almost a routine method of digital photography, primarily because it provides a number of benefits. It gives us images that we wouldn't have otherwise have been able to achieve. It allows us to engage in photographic opportunities that we might have otherwise have missed. So that's enough for benefits. I'm sure as you go along, you personally will be realizing benefits as you pursue HDR photography, and I think that you'll find that your benefits will more or less be suitable to you personally. What we're going to do next is we're going to talk about fundamentals of high dynamic range photography. Keep in mind that we're moving along, getting ourselves to a point where we can talk about capturing for high dynamic range image processing. So I'll see you in the next segment. I hope you're having a good time here, and we'll catch you in a few minutes.